Hey, let's have a video on amphibians and reptiles. Go ahead and write down your questions. And let's start with amphibians. Frogs, toads, and salamanders are examples of amphibians. They are ectothermic vertebrate. Ooh, lots of cold-blooded animals we've been talking about lately, which, of course, have backbones, what vertebrate means. Amphibians begin their lives in water, but most spend their adulthood on land, returning to water just to reproduce. So it's not like they're in the water, out of the water, in the water, out of the water, in the water, out of the water all their lives. It's primarily younger in the water, adult out of the water, but just returning to the water to reproduce. Salamanders, and here's examples of salamanders over here. Salamanders keep their tails as adults, but of course frogs do not. But in the process, the metamorphosis, you might say, they do have tails at some point. Fertilized eggs develop in water, and the eggs are fertilized internally for salamanders, but externally for toads and frogs. After a few days for both, larvae begin swimming free, which in the frog's case is called a tadpole. Both salamander and frog undergo a metamorphosis. So let's take a look at these two cycles here. We have the salamander, that's the adult. We have the internally fertilized eggs, which will eventually be put somewhere. Egg mass in water, as it says here. And as the salamanders develop into a larva, I guess is probably the way to put it, you can see it has a longer tail. It already has these legs. There's not quite as much a dramatic change with the salamander as it is for the tadpole. And I see I have these a little bit low here. Let me try to move at least the tadpole and frog up so you can see that a little bit better. But anyway, as we go down here, you can see that the frogs for eggs are fertilized internally. They start out at eggs, then in tadpole, you can see they barely have some legs here. The frogs are going to end up developing legs, and they're going to end up developing tails. So here, as it is kind of past the larvae stage, it still has that tail, but as a grown-up, it will lose the tail. Now, something that I've noted here is that frogs and salamanders are, well, they're carnivores. They don't go around eating plants. They're eating other animals like flies and so on. Now, a salamander will just outright stalk its prey. But that's kind of not how a frog does. Frogs and toads are usually going to wait on their prey. Now, a couple of the notes I have here. Something kind of interesting. Both of these, whenever they are in their youth stage, in the larva stage, they have a two-chambered heart, but they develop a three-chamber heart as it gets into the adult part. Both start as herbivores, but they are carnivores by the time they are adults. Let's go on to the reptiles. Let me just check my notes to make sure I have something wrong. Did not include something, and sure enough, there is something I did not include. Amphibian skin is delicate, and you can see from from what you know about frogs that it's not going to be rough and scaly skin. It's delicate skin, and their eggs lack shells. So if something goes wrong in a certain habitat or a certain ecosystem, you're liable to see amphibians have a period of dying out. Perhaps some pesticide was sprayed in a certain place that the frogs and other amphibians just can't battle very well. That happens sometimes. Now let's talk about reptiles. Reptiles are also ectothermic, cold-blooded vertebrates. They have scaly skin. They are made more to live on land. And that their scaly skin is an adaptation to that. The scaly skin helps them be on land and not be able to have to run into the water periodically. Well, I say periodically, the amphibians don't go back periodically, but they just don't have the same type skin that reptiles do. Reptiles that do live in water, for example, this turtle up here, still breathe with lungs, and they come ashore to lay their eggs. Reptiles' dry, tough skin helps keep their bodies from drying out. And something kind of odd that you may not have known, just because they are perhaps out in the sun all day, their urine is actually less watery. It is more concentrated, and what happens is the reptile's kidneys do that. They keep the urine less concentrated so it can keep as much water in it as possible. It's kind of an odd thing to know, but there you go. Looking at my notes here. Reptiles have internal fertilization and they lay their eggs on land. Now, reptile eggs are different from amphibian eggs. They have a shell. You can see that right here. They have a shell. And there's actually several things we can point out about this shell. They have several membranes inside of it. And this shell with membranes inside is a little more durable than an amphibian shell would be. But from looking here, you can see there were arrows pointing to different parts in here. We have the embryo that's right here, but we have a membrane for the yolk, which is like food for the embryo. We have a membrane for oxygen and carbon dioxide. I'm not sure which one of those is that membrane, but you actually have pores in the shell that let in oxygen and let out carbon dioxide. You have one membrane that holds a protecting liquid, another one holds the embryo's waste. There are several several membranes that are inside these amniotic eggs, and I don't think I have put that down. But an egg with a shell and internal membranes to keep it from drying out is called an amniotic shell, an amniotic egg. I'm wondering if you hear my children talking in the background. I kind of hope you are so they can be on YouTube. Well, anyway, let's go to a different thing. You have the largest reptiles, and sure enough, I went too far. The largest reptiles are going to be alligators and crocodiles. The most abundant reptiles are going to be lizards and snakes. Now, dinosaurs were reptiles at one point also, but they're no longer around, so that would leave the crocodile and the alligator as the largest. Now, crocodiles happen to have these longer snouts. You can see the longer snout here and the shorter snout there. And whenever their mouths are closed, you see more crocodile teeth than you do on an alligator. So just kind of so you'll know that. Most lizards and snakes are carnivores. Same thing is going to be true for alligators and crocodiles. Not quite always true about the former reptiles, dinosaur, and the turtles. These, some of them were carnivores, some of them herbivores. Well, I hope you've learned a little bit about amphibians and reptiles.